Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to be introducing Ethereum to the audience today as a part of the Blockchain Technology Program by Atal FTP. And I'm super thankful to Sujata for inviting me to this program. Very excited to be a part of this program and hope that all of you get to understand about Ethereum today. I know that Ethereum and Bitcoin have picked up a lot of buzz primarily because of their cryptocurrency prices skyrocketing very recently. But in today's talk, I'll be explaining to you about the technology Ethereum itself and how it works. So, before we get into it, I know that all of us are now living in this virtual world. We are meeting each other virtually and we are talking to each other virtually. So, it's very important to get to know each other, right? And I'm sure you are very intrigued to know who your speaker is, right? As mentioned, my name is Jnana Lakshmi TC, and I'm currently working as a product manager at Wiley Next, which falls under Wiley Publications. Everyone calls me Gyan. That's how I'm generally addressed by. I've been working in the software industry for actually over 8+ years now. And I started my career as a software programmer, worked as a software programmer on various programming languages like Java, Python, primarily in cloud-based organizations like Oracle and VMware. And as I worked in my role, I kind of developed a passion for emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and blockchain, where I self researched on these topics and learned a lot by myself, developed a lot of applications, participated in a lot of hackathons, and became a technology geek. I During my free time, I actually volunteer my time to different blockchain organizations like Algorand, Eternity, the Near India Guild, and I work as an ambassador. I volunteer as an ambassador with these organizations, and I work to learn their technology and spread the word amongst the blockchain community. And I also recently wrote a book on learning supervised algorithms with Python. So if you're interested, I'll be happy to drop in a link. It's in the field of AI, of course, machine learning, my another field of interest that I'm very intrigued in and love to work with, right? So yeah, overall, I'm a technology geek, as you can see, and I'm super excited to talk about blockchain today with you all. If you feel like dropping me a line, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. My profile link is right up here. So, in today's talk, the agenda of the talk would be to introduce you to blockchain, of course, and Ethereum. Why I want to cover a short introduction of blockchain itself as a topic is because I'm sure you have, in your previous sessions, you have learned about blockchain, the different types of blockchain, the different applications of blockchain. But here, when we talk about Ethereum, which is a public blockchain, we are going to require you to know the essentials of and the underlying functionality of blockchain, right? Some features of blockchain that make it interesting, and that will trickle down to Ethereum as well when we talk about Ethereum. So when I talk about blockchain, when I talk about the features of Ethereum, you should be able to connect the dots and understand how things are functioning. Of course, the features of Ethereum, what makes it so special, right? And a sneak peek into ETH 2.0. ETH 2.0 is a proof of stake version of Ethereum, which the Ethereum ecosystem is moving towards as we speak. And it's a very, very interesting concept that I'll be talking about, and definitely try to shed a little bit light into what this ETH 2.0 would look like. So, before we get started, it is very important to understand why blockchain and how it came about in the first place, right? So, according to you, what is Web 3.0? When we talk about all these different technologies, right? AR, VR, we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about robotic process automation, we talk about blockchain, we talk about quantum computing, right? And we say that these are all Web 3.0 technologies or frameworks. So, what, according to you, is Web 3.0? Or rather, what is the evolution of web that has led us to this point that is Web 3.0? Let's take a look. Web 1.0, when it started, right, when the World Wide Web itself came into picture by Tim Berners-Lee, it was nothing but a readable phrase of, Web 1.0 was a readable phase of World Wide Web, right? It just had flat data. You could go online and you could read stuff. So basically something like Wikipedia, right? So you have minimal interaction. Right now you can actually contribute stuff to Wikipedia. But in the earlier times when Web 1.0 came, you could just go online and read information, right? Think early in the times when you could just go and read some news, or you could see what was happening across the world. So it was more of a static reading page, if you think about Web 1.0. And then it evolved to becoming Web 2.0, which became the writable phase of the World Wide Web with interactive data. Basically, now you could not only just read, but you could also contribute to the web. You could edit the data, you could provide information, you could collaborate and participate in the ecosystem to make it better, right? So, Web 2.0 was more and more interactive, and you as a user could interact with the web. That was a primary and one of the biggest evolutions, if you think about, right? Web 2.0. Now what is Web 3.0? Well, Web 3.0, as we see today, is nothing but the executable phase of World Wide Web. Nowadays what is happening is you are not only able to participate in this ecosystem, but the ecosystem is trying to understand the needs of different people by using technologies like AR, VR, artificial intelligence, right? There are recommender systems that are being built which recommend you some products the moment you purchase something on an e-commerce website, right? So it's not just now reading or collaborating. It's the machine is becoming more and more intuitive to what the users want, right? In Web 3.2 ecosystem, computers are able to work with information just like us humans work with, right? And information that we get is tailored to our preferences. So basically Web 3.0 is nothing but a culmination of a smarter web, right? The technology is becoming more and more smart. And as the technology becomes more and more smart, what does it need from us to become more smart? It needs data, right? As everybody's been saying all over the globe, data is the new oil, right? So the internet, the web is collecting a lot of data from users to give all of these preferences to build all of this technology. Now in this entire ecosystem, if you see, right, we love our Google Homes, we love our Alexas, right? We love all the new cool AR VR technologies that are coming in, right? What is the one big gap that you feel that is present in the Web 3.0 umbrella, or rather what is the one thing that's missing in the Web 3.0 umbrella? Let me give you a very, very recent example, to give you some context of what I'm talking about. If you have heard of this recent changes in the WhatsApp policy, right? All the user data, all the user chats would now be usable by Facebook for their, for whatever purposes they would like to use. I don't want to delve deeper into this topic. This is an ongoing topic that's I'm happy to chat about later. But think in this context, right? So what is the one thing that we feel is still missing in the Web 3.0 umbrella, right? Well, simply put, this one thing is trust, right? You could have thought of it as security, you could have thought of it as privacy, or you could have thought of it as your data. How can you protect your data in such a way that it cannot be misused, or it can only be used by parties who require that data, and not just to anybody and everybody who has a hold on their data, right? So you could have thought about it in many of these different ways when I posed the question. And all of this kind of comes to your pivot point, that is trust, right? Unless and until we trust an app, we trust the web, we will not use that particular app, or we will not work with that particular browser, right? So trust is the primary requirement for all the apps, for everything in this Web3 ecosystem to run, right? So I just put a stamp on trust, right? Now, let's move ahead. All right. So, so this is where, we is the whole ecosystem kind of came together to build something that solves this problem of trust. So in the year 2009, a paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, by an author or a group of authors. We still don't have clarity on that. Called Satoshi Nakamoto, released this paper. A paper was released by Satoshi Nakamoto, which spoke about Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. This electronic cash system, that is Bitcoin, the underlying technology to this system is what we call today as blockchain, right? It spoke about, if you see here, a peer-to-peer, a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash system, which would allow online payments to be directly sent from one party to another party without going through a financial institution. So that is one of the biggest highlights over here, right? Without going through a financial institution, right? So if you see that. So here what it says is, the whole idea of this paper, or the whole idea of this particular cryptocurrency, was that we are able to remove intermediaries in a financial transaction, and that's how Bitcoin came about. The underlying technology itself is the technology known as blockchain. Now, let us do a quick walkthrough of what is blockchain. I'm sure you're already familiar with it, but I'll just do a 5 minute walkthrough, 7 minutes walkthrough before we dive into Ethereum, right? So, what is blockchain? Blockchain is nothing but a set of transactions which are clubbed together and combined into one block. These blocks are connected to each other, which is known as a blockchain. It is also known as a distributed ledger technology, because all the information that you capture into the blockchain, right, it is distributed with everybody who's a part of the blockchain network. So one of the primary underlying components of a blockchain is the blockchain network, right? And on this network, a lot of participants can join the network depending on the type of blockchain, and they are the ones who can perform transactions within each other. Once they perform the transactions are clubbed together and combined into blocks. The blocks are connected to each other, or rather linked to each other, right? If you think about, if you come from a programming background, you can think of these blocks linked to each other as linked lists in programming, which are linked to each other using pointers. Here, the blocks are linked to each other using hashes, and they form the blockchain. It is open source, one of the most important things about this technology, right? And one I would like to highlight for everyone who wants to learn about this technology and wants to contribute eventually, that it is open source. So all of you can, whichever framework you want to work on, you can always fork the code and contribute to the code. So this is one of the biggest pluses, that most of the frameworks are being developed and heavily contributed by the community. It is immutable. I'll show you in just a bit what that means, right? But if you think about the textbook definition of immutable, is that you cannot easily change the information on blockchain, right? Of course, it promotes decentralization, or rather, it implements decentralization in a way that there is no single party who is actually taking charge of all your transactions, approving your transaction, right? And who is in charge of ensuring that your transactions go through. That whole process, or the whole process, whichever has is being done by the centralized agencies, centralized financial agencies so far, is being taken care by the blockchain network itself. And that's how it brings in decentralization, because the more people participate in the system, the more people can contribute to the system, and they can decide how the system should work, right? It is not one single person who's deciding which of the transactions should go through, which should not go through, and how the network should work, right? It's a group of people who are deciding it together, and hence decentralization. So what is a block, right? A block is, of course, one of the key components of blockchain itself, like I mentioned, right? So let's visualize this block instead of, just talking about it. So if you see this, if you're able to see my screen, you can see that here is an Anders Brown Worth website, which I generally use for all of my demos. Here you can see what is a hash, what is a block, what is a blockchain. So a block is nothing but, if you can see here, it has some components, right? Programmatically, it can be represented by all of these things put together. That is a block ID. A nonce block ID is a unique ID for every block in that network. A nonce is a special number that helps you track where that block lies in your entire blockchain, right? And of course, it's also used in mining. It is the data that is present inside the block is nothing but that set of transaction. Like I said, I'm just writing here some dummy data, but it's the set of transactions that happen on the network that gets stored in the block, right? And the hash of the block is nothing but the hash of the data that is present in the block. So when I click on mine, basically what happens is these transactions get written onto the block, and this block gets finalized and gets added onto the blockchain. That's what it means by mining a block. You are finalizing a particular block and adding it to the blockchain. Now, if you see what a blockchain looks like, like I said, a set of blocks connected to each other. What is the link between the blocks? Let's see that here. So if you see the first block here, first block in every blockchain network is also known as the Genesis block, right? So here you see that the block ID is 1, there is a nonce 11316, and then let's say there is some data, right? So while I mine this block, I'll explain what these two components are. So if you see, there is a component called previous, right, which is all zeros. That means there is no previous block to this particular block. And then there is a hash to this block, which is a particular hash based on the data that I wrote, right? If I change the data, the hash changes, as you can see. So the next block will hold the hash of the previous block, as you can see, previous, and it will hold the hash of that block itself, right? Similarly, the next block will have the hash of the previous block as well as its own hash, and so on. So this is how the blocks in a blockchain are connected to each other. The upcoming block will have the hash of the previous block as well as its own hash. So how is a blockchain immutable, right? It is very difficult that once you create a block and add it to the blockchain, it is very difficult to tamper with that block or change data. This is what brings about security, right, to the blockchain. Now let's see how. So here I'm just going to mine a couple of blocks and show you. So I'm mining this block 2 at this point, and let me mine another block. So don't bother about this dummy data that I'm entering. It's going to be completely different when you're actually working with the blockchain. It would be centric to whatever use case you are building upon, the data, that is the transactions that you're doing on the blockchain, right? So now, when you see the hashes, right, that have been created after mining the block, if I try to change any information in these hashes, or in the data, if I try to tamper the data that is present in the blockchain, the hash of this changes drastically, right? So I think it was L or something. I don't remember what it was before. Uh, Okay, so whatever it was, okay, let's move to this block. So if I remove the S, right, this block becomes red. Similarly, when I try to change the data and this block becomes red. But it's not only this block that is affected, it's all the other blocks that are connected to it that are affected. Because if you try to change the data in one block, the next block, which has the hash of this block, right, it gets confused because the hash of the previous block now has changed. And similarly, this hash of this block is completely dependent on the different components of this particular block. So the next block gets confused because the hash of the previous block is not matching, and so on. So there is a dominoes effect as you go. And this is one of the ways that blockchain is extremely secure, because whenever you try to tamper with any data, right, the hash of that particular block will change drastically. Therefore, it is very difficult to attack this particular chain, because the more transactions keep coming, the more blocks will keep getting added, and you will not be able to tamper with the chain easily. Similarly, if you go to distributed, I'm not going to spend much time on it, but you can see that what a distributed ledger means, right? So if you see the blockchain, all of this data that is there in the blocks, right, the blockchain itself is nothing but set of data. All of this is written onto a ledger, right? Now, if you see peer A here will have a ledger, right? The same ledger will be reflected with peer B and peer C and so on. So whoever is a part of the blockchain network will have a copy of this ledger, which will get updated as the ledger gets updated. Therefore, if one person tries to change information in their ledger, it will not reflect across other ledgers, and you can easily capture the fraudulent actions that this person is trying to do. So let us go back and quickly see what we were working with. So what is a block? Now you know a block is nothing but an essential component of the blockchain that consists of different things like a block ID, the transactions most important bundled up together, a nonce, a hash, and the previous block hash. I'll also try to show you a block on the Bitcoin Block Explorer, just to the Ethereum Block Explorer. So before we move ahead to Ethereum, there are two major questions that we ask when we are building our blockchain, right? If you think about the underlying concept, how is blockchain immutable is the first biggest question, right? Because you're thinking that you're saying that it helps you establish trust, it is good for security. So how is it immutable? As we have already seen, the immutability comes from the cryptographic hashes, right? Now, the second and the most important question, who selects the next block? How does the next block get added to the blockchain? Well, this is where your consensus protocols come in. Every blockchain network has their own underlying consensus protocol, which helps you select, which has the logic to help select the next block that will get added onto the blockchain. So, how will one select the next block? The logic is built into your consensus protocol. There are two different types of consensus protocols. One is called proof of work, and another is called proof of stake. Bitcoin and the current Ethereum implementation, which is moving towards proof of stake, is based on proof of work. There are several other blockchains that are also based on proof of work, but proof of stake is becoming more and more popular. That's why Ethereum is also moving towards proof of stake. Let's see quickly what the difference between each of them is. For proof of work, in order to add a block to the chain, an entity known as a miner, right, a person in the network, or rather a computer system which has joined the network, must compete to solve with others a difficult puzzle using their computer's processing power. Now, the drawback of this is that a lot of people have started misusing this and started accumulating lots and lots of computing power just to perform mining. What is happening is, because of this, there is a lot of power wastage that is happening just for the process of mining, right? Whereas for a proof of stake, right? Why are people interested in mining? Because after mining, that is, after adding a block to a particular block to the blockchain, you get some reward. And as you know, the cryptocurrency prices are skyrocketing, the rewards are also going to be equally high. That's why there's a lot of processing power that is getting wasted, and it's not environmentally sustainable if mining continues, right? That's why people started moving to proof of stake. What is proof of stake? In proof of stake, as the name suggests, right, the more stake you have in that particular network, the more likely it is that you will get to select the next block, right? So there is no competition like people are solving some puzzles to get selected. I mean, that might be a part of your underlying proof of stake algorithm, but mostly what is the underlying principle is that you need to own a lot of tokens of that particular, a lot of cryptocurrency of that particular network, a token of that particular network, in order to be eligible to get selected to participate in the next block selection round, right? So here a lot of it is based on how the underlying proof of stake algorithm is built, right? And this is what Ethereum 2.0 is all about. It is about moving from proof of work to proof of stake, right? So I just want to quickly run through the difference between public blockchains and private blockchains. I know that you have had a session on types of blockchains earlier, so I'm just going to make this quick so we can move on to Ethereum, right? So when you think about so there are two major types of blockchains. There are also other things apart from public and blockchain, like hybrid blockchains, consortium blockchains, like, which we'll not go into that much right now. So public blockchains, right? Like I said, the underlying blockchain network is where participants can join the network and perform some transactions on that particular network using the rules of that particular network. Now, in bigger enterprises, it could happen that the transactions that are being performed are confidential and they don't want their data to be leaked to all the public. That's where private blockchain concept came into picture, where some particular parties have created a blockchain amongst themselves where they are transacting and interacting, and the data, the confidentiality, everything remains in that particular network. So it only remains amongst a particular few parties who are private to that particular blockchain. Whereas in a public blockchain infrastructure, anybody and everybody in the world can join these networks. It's open for public to join, build, and explore. In a public blockchain ecosystem, the transaction ledger is visible to everyone who is on the network, right? The public ledger. So everybody can see what transactions took place on the network. Whereas in a private blockchain, the transaction ledger is only visible to those parties who are in that particular private network. A public blockchain ecosystem is completely decentralized, right? Because it is open to all the public, so there are more and more stakeholders who join the network, right? So the network is huge and there is no centralized party who gets to take decisions about who can do transactions versus who cannot, right? Data security for a public blockchain comes from the fact that once the data is validated and added onto the blockchain, it cannot be tampered with easily, as you have already seen. For a private blockchain, though it is decentralized, but it's only decentralized in the sense that those who are a part of the network, it is decentralized amongst them, that in those parties there is no centralized authority, right? Not to the large, because the network itself is not open to the larger audience. There are restrictions on this network as to who can join and who cannot join, right? Of course, because it is private to certain parties who want to perform transactions. The public blockchains are known as permissionless blockchains because you don't need permissions to join the blockchain, whereas private blockchains are known as permissioned blockchains because there are membership rules associated with that blockchain as to who can be a part of the network and who cannot. So, to summarize all of what we have learned so far in the space of blockchain, permissionless blockchain is nothing but a decentralized database that can be read by all, written by all, and it is immutable for all. And Ethereum is one such permissionless or public blockchain that we are very, very interested to get to know in this talk today. So let's get right to it without any further delays, right? Ethereum is a public blockchain that was proposed in the late 2013 by Vitalik Buterin, who is a cryptocurrency researcher and programmer. He was a part of the Bitcoin team as well, and he was quite interested to expand that Bitcoin technology to benefit more and more people, and of course, add some programming flavor to it. It's open source. Ethereum is, of course, open source. It's a public blockchain platform which has successfully implemented the functionality of smart contracts. We will be talking about smart contracts in just a bit. But like I said, Bitcoin is a blockchain which is purely used for cryptocurrency transactions, right? Whereas Ethereum, when it came into picture, it added a programming flavor to it with the help of smart contracts, right? Ether is a token. Ether is the pure is a cryptocurrency, the underlying cryptocurrency of your Ethereum blockchain. It is also used for performing transactions on the Ethereum blockchain. So it is important to note that whether you're deploying a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain, whether you're transferring Ether on the Ethereum blockchain, whether you're performing any transactions on the Ethereum blockchain, you need to hold some Ether to do so. Ether can be transferred between accounts and it can also be used to incentivize miners, right? So right now, as it's based on proof of work and is moving to proof of stake, The proof of work based Ethereum ecosystem uses Ether to incentivize the miners. Ethereum provides a decentralized virtual machine, which is known as EVM or Ethereum Virtual Machine, which we will talk about a little later. It is a Turing complete virtual machine, right? Which is used to execute the scripts, your smart contracts, using an international network of public nodes. So, your international network of public nodes is nothing but all your participants who are a part of the Ethereum network, right? And the smart contracts or the scripts that are executed on this particular network are executed using the EVM or the Ethereum virtual machine. So Ethereum virtual machine is a Turing complete virtual machine. Well, now that we know a little bit about Ethereum, I also want to show you the Ethereum website in just a bit. But let me tell you about the evolution of Ethereum, right? So, as I already mentioned, in 2013, there was a white paper that was published by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, before the project started launching in 2015, right? This is how it all began in 2013, hardly 7 years ago. And then in 2015, so here when I talk about these different titles like Frontier or Constantinople, right, Byzantium, these are all the forks of Ethereum, right? What is a fork? A fork is nothing but when you take a project, right, and then you take a part of the project code or the entire project code, right? You fork it out from the current repository to create a new repository which has more added features, right? So the titles that you will see here are the different forks that I will be talking about through different years. I'm not going to be talking about too much, just an intro, but just to give you this idea, right? You will see the jargon forks being used a lot in the blockchain ecosystem, especially. So in 2015, Frontier, the first ever barebone implementation of Ethereum, was live, right? It was intended for technical users, specifically developers. So it had a lot of features that pertain to developers, and it was interesting to see how that kind of evolved, right? So in 2017, there was the Byzantium fork. It was an important fork with certain characteristic changes to the Ethereum ecosystem. The block rewards were reduced from 5 Ether to 3 Ether. Sorry for the mistake here. And then it added the ability to make non-state changing calls to other contracts. So basically, every fork. So in between 2015 to 2017 as well, there were multiple forks, and every fork adds some kind of capability to the existing ecosystem and makes it better, right? Now the most interesting thing that we are looking forward to, that in 2020, as we speak and as we stand today, the beacon chain Genesis block was created on December 1st, 2020, right? So the beacon chain required a couple of so beacon chain is nothing but your Ethereum's 2.0, that is your proof of stake based Ethereum, that is coming up very soon, right? And the beacon chain is a chain that keeps track of all the different sharding elements of your Ethereum ecosystem, your proof of stake ecosystem, right? And the genesis of this happened on December 1st, 2020, which was the first step towards ETH2. Right. So as you see, if you are seeing now the Ether price is shooting up a lot, it is because everybody is very, very bullish about that proof of stake based Ethereum that is coming up. So like I said, I want to show you the Ethereum website as well. So if you go to ethereum.org, right, you can see that you can see a lot about Ethereum. You can see what it is about Ethereum, how is it useful for developers, and how is Ethereum being used for enterprises, right? You can see that you can get started with Ethereum, you can get to know about Ethereum, what is Ethereum, how can you build on top of Ethereum, what are wallets, right? Ethereum 101 you can see here. And you can see what are see what are wallets, how can you manage your ETH wallets, right? What are accounts, which we'll be seeing in a bit as well. What are Ethereum dApps? How can you download the dApps and how can you explore those dApps? How can you build on Ethereum? How can you join the community, etc. Right? And here is the tab where I picked up the data for our evolution slide. But you can see here that there are other folks as well. I spoke about this white paper, which was 2013, but there was another yellow paper released by Dr. Gavin Wood. This is also a paper worth reading, right? And you can definitely get a lot of information about the technical definition of the Ethereum protocol in this particular paper. Then you see Ether sales started in 2014, then Frontier, as I already mentioned, in 2015, and then Homestead, the DAO fork in 2016. Then there was a Tangerine Whistle. DAO fork was a very important fork, right? Post the DAO attack, when a lot of Ether funds were stolen, there was a big fork which forked the Ethereum community into Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. So this is a very important fork, and you should definitely read more about this. We are actually working on Ethereum, not the classic version, right? So you can see Tangerine Whistle and so on, right? The recent, as you see, the staking deposit contract was deployed on October 14, 2020. That is, a contract was deployed where people could start staking their ethers. That is moving from proof of work to proof of stake, right? This happened recently, and then our Beacon Chain Genesis, of course, happened in December 1st, 2020. Right? So now that we have a fair idea of how Ethereum kind of evolved, what we'll be doing in this particular our next section, that is the features of Ethereum. So let's see what are the different features of Ethereum that we will be looking into. So the first thing that we will be talking about are the Ethereum accounts. What are the different types of Ethereum accounts and what kind of transactions can take place on these Ethereum accounts? And then, of course, the Ethereum virtual machine itself, the magic machine, the Turing complete machine on which all the smart contracts function. Well, how can we just keep talking about smart contracts and not explain what a smart contract is, right? So that is definitely going to be one of the features that we'll be talking about. Last but not the least, I'm sure you must have heard a lot about the gas price and why people might be moving from Ethereum to other public blockchains. So we will take a look at what are transactions and what is gas. Let us start by understanding what are accounts in Ethereum. Accounts in any blockchain, in fact, are your entry into the blockchain, or rather your identity on the blockchain. In an account that you create on top of a blockchain network is where you store the tokens or the cryptocurrency of that particular network. Using your accounts is how you can perform transactions over the blockchains. So let's see what are accounts in Ethereum. There are two types of accounts in Ethereum that share the same address space. The first one is known as externally owned accounts, or EOAs, that are controlled by the public private key pair. So your externally owned accounts are nothing but accounts that you create to store some ether, right, as a part of your wallet. Your contract accounts are controlled by the code, that is your smart contract code, which are also stored together with your externally owned accounts. So the two types of accounts that can be created on your Ethereum blockchain are externally owned accounts and contract accounts. Contract accounts are those accounts from where you deploy your smart contracts onto the blockchain. And your externally owned accounts are those accounts where you store your ether, right? Let us see the different types of transactions that can happen between the externally owned accounts and the contract accounts, right? Now, as you see in the first set of transactions, your externally owned account can call or perform a transaction to the contract account, which in turn can internally call another contract account. So here you can see that there are two types of transactions that are happening. That is an externally owned account calling a contract account, as well as a contract account calling another contract account internally, right? So this could be, your first one could be you deploying a contract, right? That could be one way. Or you could be sending certain ethers to a particular contract, or you could be using your account to call a contract that is on the blockchain network. Now that contract that you have called may internally have some calls to call another contract, right? And this is the second type of transaction that you see here. Another type of transaction that you see is externally owned accounts calling other externally owned accounts. So you could transfer ethers between two externally owned accounts, which are just like transferring money between any two accounts, right? The analogy for that on the Ethereum blockchain network. We'll see a little more about the accounts in a couple of minutes. But here is how you can use your accounts to perform transactions. Sorry, we'll see more about transactions in a couple of minutes. But here is how you can use the accounts to perform transactions on the blockchain network. Now, the second and of course an interesting feature, right, of Ethereum network are the smart contracts. So if you see the definition of Ethereum, or if you go to ethereum.org and see what they say about Ethereum, is that Ethereum is the first programmable blockchain, and that's true, right? So the programs or the piece of code that is stored on the blockchain is known as a smart contract, right? So a smart contract is nothing but think of your agreements, right? That you sign in a real time scenario. An agreement between you and your owner if you're staying in a rented house. An agreement between you if you are a lender and there is a borrower who's borrowing some money from you. An agreement between you as a lender and your borrower, right? Stating certain terms and conditions based on which certain actions will be executed once a particular deadline reaches. So, an analogy to the smart contracts, that is the programmable entity on the blockchain, is your real world agreements, right? So, if we come back to the smart contracts, that is your blockchain agreements, it is a piece of code which contains some logic, which has all these rules and conditions that you will put in the form of code and then deploy it on the blockchain. And this particular piece of code gets executed on the blockchain, and some actions happen based on the conditions that you have written on the code. So let's see some features of the smart contract. What is a smart contract on Ethereum, right? Smart contracts are nothing but similar to your computer programs that comprise of the business logic for your applications. For example, if you want to build an application where a voter's identity can be verified, right? If you want to build a decentralized application where a voter's identity can be verified, you can write a smart contract wherein if a particular voter, say, uploads a picture where the picture of the voter matches the picture that they take using your camera feature, then the voter is registered automatically. So based on some condition, you are performing some action, right? Or if you want to build a decentralized app, for example, for an education based system, right, where if a student gets particular amount of marks, then the student is automatically marked as pass, and they get the certificate to go to the next term, right? So I'm just giving some example of logic that you could put in your smart contract. It could be anything based on the use case or the application that you are building. Once a smart contract is deployed on the blockchain, we cannot change any information on the smart contract and it remains immutable. So, if you remember a couple of minutes ago when I showed you the demo on the Anders Brown Worth website, there I showed you that once data is logged or a block is mined and added to the blockchain, the data is encrypted or it is safeguarded using a cryptographic hash, right? So the similar concept applies to a smart contract. The smart contract code actually becomes the data eventually in some format and is cryptographically secured using hashes. So once you write a logic in the form of a smart contract and deploy it on the blockchain, you cannot change anything on this smart contract. This is one of the drawbacks, we can say, of smart contracts in Ethereum. But this is also important because when you're doing any financial agreements, or when you are doing any financial transactions which require some terms and conditions, you want to ensure that those agreements, those terms and conditions cannot be tampered with easily. And this is where blockchain can be very, very useful. One of the other takeaways from this property is that whenever you write a smart contract, you need to be, in fact, very, very smart and build in logic in such a way that you don't have to change it later. You can, of course, by the way, deploy another smart contract and refer to this smart contract and make the changes in the new one, but it's a cumbersome process, right? Yeah, the next point is the same. The only way to change a smart contract is to redeploy a new one on the network. And you need to reference it to the old one, saying the old one is not valid anymore. Smart contracts operate with very limited execution context. So let me explain to you what is very limited execution context. So smart contracts, so if you think about blockchain, right? You think about blockchain being a huge chain with a lot of transactions and a lot of information about all of these transactions that have happened in the past since the genesis block of that particular network, right? Imagine your Ethereum blockchain network. There must be billions and billions of transactions that have happened on that network. So there's a lot of information that is present in the ledger. But smart contracts, as such, they do not work with all of these blocks that are a part of the blockchain, right? By default, they operate with a limited execution context so that they can focus on what they are meant to do, right? They can access their own state, the context in which the transaction has been happening, or the different transactions that are happening, the context of those that is related to that smart contract, and some information about the most recent blocks is what you can access, or you should preferably access from your smart contract. So now let's move to the interesting part of, the interesting feature of Ethereum, that is the transaction, right? So how do transactions happen? What are the different transactions that are present in the Ethereum blockchain? Well, you've already seen a glimpse of it when I spoke about the accounts. But here are the three types of transactions that can happen on the Ethereum blockchain. The first is transferring Ether from one account to another. Now, if I were to quiz you, what kind of accounts were these? I hope all of you said externally owned accounts, right? So we can transfer Ether from one externally owned account to another externally owned account, right? As I go through these transactions, I would also like to show you examples on the browser. So if you see this particular transaction, right, you can also go to etherscan.io and look at the different transactions. As I said, blockchain is nothing but a distributed ledger, right, where all the transactions, especially for public blockchain, is available to view by the public, right? So if you see here, there is a transaction that has happened on Jan 10th, 2021, right? And this transaction is from a particular account address, wallet ID, and it is to another address, right? So these are public addresses. I said that externally owned accounts are characterized by two addresses. One is public address and one is private address, or private key, public key and private key, a key pair, right? Your public key is your address which is available to the public, so you can transact using that address. Your private key is used to sign the underlying transaction. So you should, whenever you create an account, you will be generate a public private key pair will be generated for you. Your public key will become your address, and your private key, you should keep it always safe. So when you create an Ethereum account or any other account, you'll get a 12-word mnemonic, right? And that mnemonic is what is associated with your private key. So here you see there are two addresses, from an address to an address. 0.09 ethers have been transferred, right? So this is one type of transaction. So the value of this ether at present today, that is while I'm shooting this video, is $118.06, right? 0.09 ethers cost this much dollars. So this address has transferred to this address these many ethers. So this is one type of transaction. You can see some other parameters associated with the transaction, such as transaction fee, right? So there is a transaction fee that is associated, that needs to be paid for doing the work, right, for this particular transaction. There is a block ID, as we have seen. There is a timestamp, when did the transaction happen, from address to address, the status of the transaction. There is a transaction hash that is generated for every transaction. There is a gas price and a gas limit, which I will talk about in just a minute, or just a couple of minutes. How much gas is used by the transaction, right? The nonce, and some input data if there is any data associated with it. But since this is just a cryptocurrency transaction, right? One wallet, one address transfers some amount to another address. So there is no input data. When there is a smart contract call happening here, there might be some input data, right? So going back to the next type of transaction. If you see the next type of transaction, it is a transaction that is deploying a smart contract, right? That is, from an externally owned account, you can deploy a smart contract, right? One type of transaction. So let me show you an online editor called Remix Editor, right? And this is a small smart contract. This is also something that I wanted to show you as I explained about smart contracts themselves, right? So if you see, this is it written in a language called Solidity, the version being anything greater than 7 and less than 8, between 7 to 8, right? So as we speak, this is the version of Solidity that has been released. This is the name of the smart contract. So we will go into detail about smart contracts and how to write them in the hands-on workshop session. But here I just wanted to show you that when you deploy a smart contract, so here, as a part of the Remix Editor, you get some dummy accounts created for you, so you can test it. Remix Editor is used for, it's free, and it's used for testing your smart contracts, right? So here is the account. Here is an account. Say, let's choose this second account that has been generated for you, right? These are dummy accounts, and it has 100 dummy ethers, right? Now I've already compiled the smart contract, so it is ready to deploy. Once you deploy the smart contract, that is a transaction, which is what I wanted to show you. Let me expand this here so we'll see the transaction. I deploy this, right? And I'll just expand this. So you can see that the transaction status is true, right? Transaction mined and execution succeeded. There is a transaction hash that has been generated. A contract address gets generated for every contract. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in the workshop session. But you can see from the particular account that I chose, AB8, right? This particular transaction has been initiated to deploy a smart contract. And what is it to? So if you see the to, it is this smart contract, that is storage, name of the smart contract dot constructor. So the constructor, that is the default constructor of this smart contract, has been called. So from address is the address from where you are, the externally owned account from where you are deploying, and the to address is your smart contract, right? And then there is some gas fee associated with it. There is a transaction cost for performing this transaction, and an execution cost, right? So yeah, and so on. Now let's go back. The third type of transaction is transferring ether from an externally owned account to a contract. So for this, let's go to Etherscan again and see an example, right? Let me show you. Yeah, okay. So what does this mean is that if you have a contract, sometimes you have contracts where you need to send ethers, right? Because the contract is written in such a way that maybe it is a gaming contract, right? Where you need to send some ether in order to continue playing that game. or maybe it is a contract where where it is, for example, if you know a freelancer.com, right? If you think of a decentralized freelancer.com, so you need, as a freelancer, maybe you need to send some tokens to that contract to, block your position for a particular job, or your job poster, whoever's posted the job, send some ether to the contract, so which can be paid to the person, to the freelancer, right? So these kind of transactions can happen to and fro to a contract, right? That means from an externally owned account, you can send some ethers to a particular contract. That is one another type of transaction. So here you can see that the from address remains as an account address, and the to address is a contract address. I have chosen a contract which is a famous smart contract, or a famous dApp known as CryptoKitties, right? Um, I'll show you that in just a bit. And I have chosen a contract called CryptoKitties, the core contract of CryptoKitties, to which some amount of some kind of transaction has happened. Now, it may not be a ether transfer transaction. It could just be a call, right? So in a smart contract, there could be two types of transaction. One is you could be sending some ether, or you could just be reading some data. So this transaction looks like it is just, reading something from the CryptoKitties smart contract, right? So that's a type of transaction that is happening on this Ethereum blockchain. So we have covered all the three types of transaction. I've shown you some examples. You can also explore on the browser to look at more examples of calling a contract, sending some ethers to a contract, transferring. Of course, you will find hundreds, thousands, and billions of transactions on Etherscan, which are just, one externally owned account to another externally owned account transactions. Well, now let's explore the mystery of this element called gas. Okay. I will explain about gas from a developer perspective. You can also read up more about why gas price is fluctuating more, and what is happening around the behind the economics of gas price itself, right? But what is gas, right? What is gas price that you see in every transaction? So every transaction that happens on the Ethereum network incurs a transaction fee, right? Because there is some work that is happening in the background in order for the transaction to happen, to take place, right? And that transaction fee is calculated in units called gas. Now, what is gas? It is actually the amount of ether that we are paying for the transaction to go through, right? So that is the gas price or the gas fees, right? So we set a gas limit, right, beyond which we cannot pay for that particular transaction. So if we cannot pay beyond that, then that transaction doesn't take place whenever we set a gas limit, right? So why do we use gas, right? And why not directly pay through Ether? Because Ether, as we all know, is such a volatile cryptocurrency. In fact, all of these cryptocurrencies that are trading heavily are very volatile in nature. And the value of Ether keeps changing as per the market state. Whereas the gas price that is calculated for a particular contract is fixed based on the bytecode or the instructions that make up that contract. So if you are familiar with the basics of computer programming, or rather how a program gets compiled, and then how a bytecode of a program is generated, right? Bytecode is something that is easily understandable by the machine, right? So it's more of a machine language code, our program that we write in in plain English, or rather in any particular language, needs to be understood by the machine, right? So it is converted to a byte code so that the machine can understand that particular program. And the byte code, if you see, is in the form of instructions for the machine, like and these instructions are very basic set of instructions, like add two numbers, or subtract numbers from any two registers, right? Move numbers from one register to another, or rotate numbers that is present in a particular register, etc. So you can read up more on opcodes, right? What are opcodes? But these gas prices are associated with opcodes. For each opcode, there is a fixed gas price. So for your contract, when you calculate the gas price comes as a fixed price, right? And that's why we have another entity, that is gas, using which we calculate as to how much effort is required to deploy a particular smart contract or to interact with some smart contracts, how much transaction fee should actually be paid, right? Now you might see the symbol GWEI or GWEI, right? That is nothing but WEI, that is WEI, is the smallest unit of ether, right? Wherein 1 into 10 to the power 18 WEI represents 1 ether. So in order to calculate the gas price, we sometimes represent it in the form of GWEI, right? But if you want to see the gas price as for each and every opcode, you will be able to find it on the internet easily. If you just Google like gas price opcode kind of table, you will be easily able to get that. You can even get a matching GUI to opcode conversion. Like for this opcode, how much price do you pay? So you can write your smart contract accordingly, right? If you write too many loops, right, the gas price of your smart contract would shoot up. If you perform too many complicated operations like encryption or decryption, any heavy operations, then your gas price of your contract will shoot up. So you can write your smart contract accordingly so that you have to face less and less gas price while deploying the smart contract on the mainnet. So now that we have looked at all the extensive features of Ethereum and are fairly familiar with how Ethereum works, right? I would just like to give a sneak peek of what are the features of Ethereum 2.0. So I know that it is not necessary to understand this to build dApps. So before I don't have a slide on dApps, but I've been using this word a lot. So I just want to quickly say that dApps are decentralized applications, right? This is a generic common word in the world of blockchain. But of course, the first ever blockchain that supported dApps or was used for building dApps is Ethereum, right? So any application that you build using any decentralized blockchain or any decentralized technology is dApps, decentralized apps. So before we close, I will definitely show you some example of cool dApps that are built on Ethereum. But like I said, to actually build dApps on Ethereum, you're already set with all the concepts now. But because Ethereum 2.0 is much anticipated, I would love to show you a sneak peek of what are the features that are coming up, especially two important features that I'm going to explain to you conceptually. So let's get started. What is Ethereum 2.0, right? Ethereum 2 or 2.0 is a planned upgrade to the current Ethereum blockchain, right? There are a lot of bottlenecks if you see in the current Ethereum blockchain, is specifically around speed, efficiency, and scalability. You will see a lot of people complaining that Ethereum transactions are extremely slow, the gas price is really high, and we are unable to scale our dApps as much as we would want to. This is where Ethereum has upgraded or is in the process of upgrading itself to Ethereum 2.0. There are two major changes in terms of concepts that are being applied to the current Ethereum code base. That is, in the Ethereum 2.0, you will see that Ethereum has moved from proof of work, right? The proof of work algorithm that Ethereum uses, underlying algorithm is called ET hash. Now they are moving from proof of work to proof of stake. And the second important concept that they're introducing is sharding. The blockchains will now be sharded in order to increase the efficiency, scalability, and throughput. The major difference, of course, between Ethereum and Ethereum 2.0 is moving from proof of work to proof of stake. We have already seen proof of work and proof of stake, a little bit about both of them in the earlier, in the beginning of the talk, but I would like to shed a little bit more light on what is proof of stake as well as explain to you quickly about sharding. So proof of stake. in proof of stake, instead of miners mining the particular blocks and getting rewards for that, that is solving a cryptographically hard puzzle, there are now validators who validate the blocks. So these validators are the ones who are actually who can propose new blocks, right? They will be shelling their compute, providing the compute power, the storage, and the bandwidth to validate the transactions. Once the transactions are validated, they get clubbed into the block and the block gets added into the blockchain. So you understand the purpose of validators, right? Now, instead of miners, validators are the ones who will be adding new blocks to the blockchain. So for the Ethereum 2.0 or the upcoming Ethereum 2.0 ecosystem, if you want to become a validator, there is a deposit contract of 32 ETH that you need to, where you need to send 32 ETH. That is, you need to stake your ETH onto the deposit contract, and then only you can become a validator, right? So this is there to ensure that there is no fraud, or it's there to ensure that you have stake in the system, because it is proof of stake, right? Stake is nothing but how much do you believe in this particular ecosystem. So that is why you are expected to send 32 ETH to this deposit contract and you can become a validator. Becoming a validator has several advantages. One is you can run your own node, your Ethereum node, right? And the second is that validators get rewards because you are the ones who are validating the blocks, providing the compute power, storage, etc. So you're eligible for periodic rewards. Now, what is sharding, right? As I already mentioned, that the current Ethereum ecosystem faces a lot of problem with respect to scalability, efficiency, and throughput, right? So the problem that sharding aims to solve is low throughput, right? So how can you increase the performance of your blockchain? So if you think about the current ecosystem, right, all of the nodes are participating even if one particular block has to be added to the blockchain, right? So actually work is done by the entire network when it comes to adding a block onto the blockchain. The solution for this is sharding. So the process of sharding actually splits your entire blockchain into several smaller blockchains who act like independent entities, and they contain their own data which is separate from other shards. And there is constant validation of block proposal that is happening in each of these shards individually. So now what is happening is the bandwidth that was actually earlier being taken up by the entire network is now split into a subset of the network, right? So each node is actually only doing a subset of the total work, and this can increase the throughput exponentially. So that is why sharding is being implemented in Ethereum 2.0 ecosystem. So if you look at sharding, right, as I already told you, if you have one blockchain, right, think about one blockchain as one single ecosystem, and splitting that network work into multiple shards, right, where each shard actually acts like its own mini blockchain, right? And there is validation, there is block proposal, and all of these transaction validation happening in each of these shards individually. Now, when we think about sharding, we need to also figure out. So, if you, for an external user, right, the entire network is still one entity. Whatever technological concept we use to make the network efficient is up to us. So, that's where we bring in the concept of beacon chain, right? What happens is when there is validator assignment that is required for each of these shards, right? And then there needs to be randomness in assigning validators. Otherwise, there could be malicious validators who can take down the entire shard, right, by approving malicious transactions. So, in order to assign this, most of these existing designs, right, the shard design, have a separate blockchain which has the task of performing all the operations, which will maintain the entire network, right? So that beacon chain is that particular blockchain which is used to maintain all the different shards. It will get data from all the different shards and it will figure out, it will, basically put the pieces of the puzzle together. So as you can see, the main responsibility of the beacon chain includes managing the validators and their stakes and nominating the chosen block proposer for each shard at each step. This is where your beacon chain comes into picture. So here are some of the interesting ETH 2.0 features that I have spoken to you about. Before I close, I want to show you a couple of cool apps, like I said, dApps built on top of Ethereum. If you can see this, this is an app, dApp called Secure, right, which is used for secure messaging communication. It is also a crypto wallet and a Web3 browser built with the state of the art technology. And this entire dApp is built on top of Ethereum. Another cool dApp that I want to show is ENS, right? Ethereum Name System, which brings you decentralized naming for wallets, websites, and more. So right now, if you think about DNS, right, it is managed by a centralized server. But if you build the same DNS on top of Ethereum, it becomes a decentralized naming system. So there are a lot of other cool stuff, like I mentioned this CryptoKitties, right? So CryptoKitties again is another game which is to collect and breed digital cats, right? So you can collect different breeds of cats and hold them. So this uses a concept called NFTs, right? Non-fungible tokens, which you can read about later. So you can buy and sell cats with the community, crack puzzles alongside other players. So it's a very cool game, and it was one of the earliest dApps that became extremely popular, which is completely built on top of Ethereum, right? So you can breed adorable cats and stuff like that. So very cool stuff. There are also a lot of other cool dApps that you can find. There are 90 plus dApps posted by Consensus in a Consensus blog that you can, of course, go and explore, right? Civic, Selfkey, Burner Wallet, MyEther Wallet. So a lot of wallets, of course, built on top of Ethereum itself, the blockchain, and then a lot of cool games and other applications. So you can build any application on top of Ethereum if your application needs to solve the purpose of decentralization, right? And as we speak today, data is becoming more and more important, and of course it is becoming really essential to ensure that we have security, privacy, and understand how decentralization can make all this happen, right? So that's all from my end for today's talk. It was really great speaking with you, audience, and I always love talking about blockchain. And with the Ethereum 2.0 coming in, there's going to be a lot of excitement, a lot of new technical stuff to explore. So I would love for you all to go and check out more about the Ethereum ecosystem. As I already shown earlier, you can go to ethereum.org. There are a lot of white papers, yellow papers to read. You have a lot of tools where you can just directly deploy Ethereum dApps. So Consensus has a lot of very cool resources that you can refer to when it comes to the Ethereum ecosystem. Then you have cloud-based systems like Infura, which you can use to deploy your dApps on one click, right? So yeah, I would love for you to explore, and we would definitely do some smart contract writing, some understanding of Solidity programming language, using which we can write smart contracts and deploy on the Ethereum blockchain. So we'll do that in the workshop, and looking forward to having you all at the workshop as well. Thank you so much for attending this talk, and I hope all of you had some good takeaways from this talk. And I hope now you are excited to explore more about the Ethereum ecosystem overall.